I think we are ready to begin. We're at chapter 9 of Genesis. We had just finished off the bow in the clouds, and we're going to get off to an interesting start. We have poor Noah. We have one more paragraph. He was so close to getting his story finished. About this interesting little tidbit here that comes towards the end. And so before we do that, let's say the blessing for Torah study, La'asok b'divrei Torah, the last words. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Excellent. Okay. Rick, it's up to you to get into the sordid tale here.
Chapter 9?
Chapter 9, verse 17.
17. That, God said to Noah, shall be the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on earth.
Okay, 18. Yes, I go ahead. Yep, I got the verse wrong. 18. Go ahead.
The sons of Noah who
There we
came
go.
out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Is that
Yeah, why not?
okay. Ham being the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole world branched out. Noah, the tiller of the soil, was the first to plant a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk, and he covered himself within his tent.
Okay, I'm going to pause for the cause right there. So we have Noah has now, they say, well, so as a reminder, he's got these three kids, Mo, Larry, and Curly here, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham, he's got a kid too, very nice. I guess it was a grandkid. And Noah, the first thing he does is he plants a vineyard. And why would you plant a vineyard?
So you could drink wine.
So you can get some wine and have a little bissel of the good stuff. But there's no Netflix right now, lots of stuff's going on. Man could use a drink, right? So the rabbis look at this, in two different ways. Like one is a little bit more punitive, a little bit more disparaging of Noah, saying, hey, maybe Noah could have planted some apple trees or something, or done something a little differently instead of first resorting to grapes, and to a vineyard. And so they sort of denigrate Noah's character and say, hey, maybe this guy shouldn't be such a booze hound. On the other hand, we have grapes for Kiddush, right? And we do enjoy a little l'chaim, and that's okay, as well. Judaism doesn't say that you can't drink. And, I wish I could never find the poem that I heard once about Noah, but the general tone of it was, almost a first person account from Noah, with Noah basically saying, hey, you drink too. What I went through, and the man had to deal with a lot of agita, and he's on the boat, for all that time with all the animals, and it's not really, a fun experience. And then fast forward a little bit to getting off the ark. So that was really the issue, right? Getting off the ark. What do you see there? Unless God did some sanitation first, it couldn't be a pleasant experience. See all the destruction, devastation, there are bodies everywhere, right? It really could not have been a very pleasant experience for Noah. And so one can perhaps forgive him for going to the Manischewitz a little bit too hard, because that's the next verse, right? Is that he drank and he became drunk, and then he sort of collapses, perhaps in a unceremonious manner onto the floor. The coveralls did not quite cover all, right? And so he's sort of down, sort of splayed out, and that's what we got right now. So Rick, give us a little more here. It's getting to the good stuff.
Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a cloth and placed it against both their backs and walked backward. They covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way so that they did not see their father's nakedness.
Okay, so there we go. And so Ham goes in and sees what he sees. and it says, "Hey, brothers, look what I saw." And Shem and Yafet were a little bit more discreet, perhaps, and they covered him up instead of sort of gawking at their father in that state. The challenging text, it's really unclear what we're talking about here. It doesn't get good, I'll put it that way. Like, there's no really great interpretation of this.
But he doesn't know when he goes in there that he's going to see his father naked.
Yes, that is true. I think the question is, what does see mean? And what happens in that moment in time, I think, is the question of what that euphemism actually means, that he saw his father's nakedness. Because later on in Leviticus, seeing someone's nakedness implies perhaps more than just viewing. And so, that there is that question there of what actually happens in the cave, too hot for Torah study. Like it's like, we're not exactly sure what happens in this moment in time, but this on most hopefully plainest sense reading is that it's just a little peekaboo, a little sort of look-see, and perhaps he enjoys that view too much, or is not, as quick to remedy the situation, and sort of make like more of a mockery situation and going, "Hey, I saw that," blah, 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 and the other two going, "What do you, don't, do that, don't say that, let's remedy this. This is our father. Let's, give him some dignity in his drunken stupor." So that's what that's sort of. So what?
So why don't they just stay out of his tent?
Also a good point. Why don't they just stay out of his tent? Dad's a little blitzed. Maybe just give him some space for the night. But nonetheless, there we are. So Noah wakes up from the wine. Okay, Melissa, Noah wakes up.
When Noah woke up from his wine and learned what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves, shall he be to his brothers." And he said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. Let Canaan be a slave to them. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be a slave to them." Noah lived after the flood 350 years, and all the days of Noah came to 950 years, then he died.
Okay, so Noah's rightly ticked off. And so again, we don't have a sense of what happens in the tent, in the cave, whatever it is, but Noah is not amused. And so Noah gives this blessing / curse to his youngest son, gets the curse card, of course, and Shem and Yafet get the better end of it, so to speak. They get a blessing, and Canaan is again more, he's going to be the lowest of the low in the family tree. Speaking of family tree, chapter 10 is just names and people begetting the entire way through, and it's all lineage. And so I did us a favor, we're going to skip that because there's nothing there that's of real interest. It's just, this one and that one had these many kids and how many years, etc., etc., etc. So we're going to skip to chapter 11. Chapter 11. Does anyone have any questions about Noah getting drunk and some implications of wrongdoings?
Is there any explanation why the story is in there?
No.
That part of the story. I mean,
So the explanation probably would be, if we're looking at this as a retelling to explain why things are how they are, it might be about how that tribe, how that peoplehood from Canaan might be seen as lower or less than. I think is why that story is probably there, to give you an explanation for why that lineage has fallen into disrepute.
why it's all right for us to conquer and turn them into slaves.
Yeah, there we go.
Sons of Ham. Not
Sons
kosher.
of Ham, not kosher. But Shem and Yafet, obviously become elevated, and the sons of Canaan are meant to be lower. So I think that's probably why it's there. Indeed. So let's move on to chapter 11. No one going bankrupt here today, but we're going to read this one. Kyle, you okay to read?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Everyone on earth had the same language and the same words. As And as they migrated from the east, they came upon a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them hard." Brick served them as stone, and bitumen served them as mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build us a city and a tower with its top in the sky to make a name for ourselves. Else we shall be scattered all over the world."
Okay, and so here they are in the good old land of Shinar, which we're going to see where that is in a moment. And they said, you know what? Let's build a tower. Let's build a big city and a tower, and let's try to reach the sky so we can make a name for ourselves. We're the best. Let's, build a big old tower, build all this real estate, and make it as high as the heavens, nice and glitzy and glamorous, right? So let's do that. The bricks, and the bitumen. The bitumen, by the way, was actually used as caulk for the ark. It was so that it would be waterproof. And so the idea would be to build this huge tower and glorify and aggrandize themselves. This "else we shall be scattered" part's interesting. This idea that maybe looking for some kind of stability. Now, let's look at it psychologically. Like we're right after the flood story, right? Where people were dispersed and destroyed. And now we have this idea of saying, hey, let's try to build something permanent. And maybe we won't be knocked out by the flood. Let's build a waterproof castle for ourselves that we can be safe in. And so they're going to use the stone and the bitumen to create this thing. And we're going to go as high as the heavens, right? We're going to go build it all the way up and maybe give God a talking to. I don't know. But the idea being that they're trying to really, again, make themselves sort of bigger, make themselves stronger, and maybe flood-proof. Make sense? Okay. Sharon, you want to pick up here on the Eternal?
The Eternal came down to look at the city and tower that man had built. And the Eternal said, "If as one people with one language for all, this is how they have begun to act, then nothing that they may propose to do will be out of their reach. Let us then go down and confound their speech there, so that they shall not understand one another's speech." Thus the Eternal scattered them from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Eternal confounded the speech of the whole earth, and from there the Eternal scattered them over the face of the whole earth.
Okay, so irony.
They built the city so they wouldn't be scattered all over the earth, and it got them scattered all
Got
over
scattered
the
anyway. The best laid plans of mice and men often go astray. So they build it up. And God's, you know what? I don't care for this. This is a little bit too much for God. Not loving this idea. It's a little mean spirited. The idea that, hey, maybe some teamwork would be great, but God sees something wrong with this that's becoming too self important, perhaps, too much about their own ego and trying to touch the heavens. And so God, you know what we'll do here? Let's change their language around, make them not understand each other. And so God, mevuval is the Hebrew. God sort of confuses and confounds the speech, which is why it's called Babel, as in Babylon, Bavel, right? So this is actually taking place now, we know, in what would later be called Babylon, which would later be called Iran. And so Bavel, Babel, and of course we have the English word for someone who is babbling, right? Who's just, going on and on in a confused way. So, yes, and so that's our story of the Tower of Babel. So we go right from Noah to Babel. And again, I would say there's a connection, right, between the impermanence and the sort of the losses sort of felt by humanity in the story of Noah, to the idea of them trying to almost become invincible in a way, try to create a tower that you can't knock down. to try to literally like sort of head to the heavens in this stone, this waterproof stone building. It seems again a little bit arrogant, I think, to God. And God says, it's not how we're going to play this. That's not going to work for me. So God makes it a little bit more complicated and says, hey, they got to work for it a little bit more. They have to, overcome some of these linguistic challenges. And how true that is even today, right? That how much stress and service comes from the inability to understand each other, right? And the inability to listen and hear our words and understand each other's perspectives. And so God pulled a fast one on us on this one, I think. But it's a very interesting lesson about how, the challenges perhaps of understanding each other and what that could lead to. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Here, I was not so kind, and I did keep in the genealogy here only because of where it ends. And because I am a nice guy, I won't torture anyone with reading this part of it because it is a little bit much. So I will brave my way through this. This is the line of Shem. Shem was 100 years old when he begot Arpachshad, 2 years after the flood. After the birth of Arpachshad, Shem lived 500 years and begot sons and daughters. When Arpachshad lived another 35 years, he begot Shelah. After the birth of Shelah, Arpachshad lived 403 years and begot sons and daughters, etc., etc. So here, by the way, we have Shelah lived 30 years. He begot Eber. Eber, same root as the hero of the story we're going to get to in a moment, right? And it means the one who crosses over, right? The one who crosses over the river. So it's Eber. So Eber, Shelah, Peleg, Eber again, more Peleg, Reu, Peleg again, Serug. This keeps going and going. When Serug had lived 30 years, he begot Nachor. And after the birth of Nachor, Serug lived another 200 years and begot sons and daughters. Nachor again. Then finally we get to Terach. Yay, Terach. Why is Terach important? Because Terach eventually gives birth to Abraham, Abram here. Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran is also a place. That's confusing for everybody because he's a name, he's a person and the place. And then we have Terah begot of Avraham, Nachor, and Haran begot Lot. And Lot we're going to know later as well. Haran finally dies in the lifetime of his father Terach in the native land of Ur, of the Chaldeans. They got some wives. Abraham and Nachor took to themselves wives. The name of Abraham's wife being Sarai. And Nachor's wife, no one cares about, is Milcah, the daughter of Haran. She's not important. The father of, everyone's important, I guess. But for our narrative, she's not going to be that important. Milcah, the daughter of Haran, Milcah and Ischa. Now, Sarai was barren, so get the preview already. This early on the preview, Sarah is barren and has no child. And then road trip. Terach took his son Avram, his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter Sarai, the wife of the son of Avram. And they set out together for Ur of the Chaldeans to the land of Canaan. But they came as far as Haran, the place, not the person. They settled there, and the days of Terach came to 205 years, and he died in Haran. So that is the end of that chapter. So we sort of have to go all the way through this family lineage from Noah all the way to Abraham or to Avram at this point. So we get a sense of how everyone is connected. We're all connected somehow. And so we're just going all the way down the lineage to the hero of the next number of chapters in Genesis, Avram, Abraham. The way I've always looked at it was, it's like three strikes in a way. God tried to create paradise and perfection with Adam and Eve. Didn't work. God gave it a shot with Noah. Didn't really work. And now, third time's the charm. We get to Avram. and he gets to sort of be our patriarch. He gets to be the hero of the story. We don't have a lot on young Abraham. We don't have a lot of his childhood. We don't have a lot of his backstory. We sort of meet him in this moment in chapter 12 where God talks to him and says, time to go, lech lecha, let's get out of here. But we don't have any information on his young life, which is why the rabbis fill in the blanks with some midrashim, some interpretation, some stories, just to give us an idea of who the heck this guy is, aside from being Terach's son and Sarai's husband, right? We don't have a sense of really who he is as a person that warrants the next chapter. It sort of jumps right into it and says, hey, Abraham, you're awesome, and this is what we're going to do. But it doesn't give us anything. So you might be familiar with the story of Abram smashing the idols, right? They have that story of how he's in his father's idol shop. And, Avram's a little bit of a smart aleck. He's got a lot of questions. And eventually the questions lead to a really violent destruction of property. Like Abraham smashes all of his father's idols, except for the big one, and says, hey, that one smashed the rest of them. And the father's like, what are you talking about? Are you high? Like, what's going on here? Like, how do you think that the big one is destroyed all the small ones? And Abraham's like, hey, if he can't do that, then why are you praying to him? Like sort of like trapping him in some logic here. I don't think Terach actually believed the big one could, jump up and do whatever it wanted anyway. But Abraham's trying to make a philosophical point about the futility of idol worship. So we get a lot of stories like that about young Avram and why perhaps his theology, his philosophy of how life worked, made him worthy of connecting to God in a special way. That's what I'm trying to say. They have to sort of fill in the blanks of why he is chosen to do this, since we don't have much on him as a way of backstory. So with all of that said, let's get into Abraham. Okay, Sandy.
The Eternal said to Abram, go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and curse him that curses you. And all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. Abram went forth as the Eternal had commanded him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran.
Okay, stop right there, because that was big and meaty and wonderful. A lot of good stuff there. So, Lech Lecha moment, right? Where God gives you a choice, God gives you an option to either stay how you are or become something different. And so, that's what we in the business call a Lech Lecha moment, that we're all sort of faced with that moment in our lives, whether we can either stay or go, whether we can, stay as we are or transform or change for the better. And that God puts these opportunities in front of us, perhaps, if we want to believe in that way, in terms of that theology, or we ourselves find ourselves at a crossroads of some sort, and we have to make a decision on what we want to do next. And what we do next can change the course of our destiny, and certainly in Avram's part, change the course of human history, of what he's going to do and what he's going to accomplish. And so we get Lech Lecha me'artzecha, go from your native land and from your father's house, from the place of your birth, in the land that I will show you. Doesn't know where he's going. Just pack it up. I've always found that part to be really tricky. It's like, it's a great, big, beautiful world. And Abraham's told, get up and go. And I'm not going to tell you where. Go west, young man. Went to the only place with no oil in the Middle East. That's where we have to go. So, I'll make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. The great nation part, again, it's going to be defined further as we get into the text. But the idea that like one has to really take a step back and to understand how fantastical this all sounds to a dude in his 70s, right? Who's childless and married, and hasn't had any children. And so now he's being told, at this point in his life, I'm going to make it, even though people were living to 205 or whatever it might have been, 75, I bet still didn't feel that young. It was like he was a young whippersnapper at this point in his life. But he does get this charge, and I'll go and I'll bless you and make you a great nation. Your name will be great, and you shall be a blessing. A lot of talk about blessing here, right? And so I think the question becomes, what does that mean, that you will be a blessing? Aside from Debbie Friedman for that song, you shall be a blessing, right?
Yes.
No, that song.
You shall be a blessing. Lech lecha.
Yeah, Lech Lecha. No, she did it. Lechi Lach.
Lechi lach, that's it.
Yeah, Lechi Lach, which means to your cheek.
Your cheek?
Yeah, because she mispronounces the Hebrew.
Oh, gotcha.
From the music, yeah. Lechi Lach, it's Lechi. Lechi Lach, but that doesn't fit in the same thing. So Lechi means cheek, and Lach is yours. So it's like to cheek. But now that I've ruined that song for everybody, it's a wonderful song. God bless her blessed memory. But that being said, it's a wonderful song, right? It's a wonderful idea of what does it mean to be a blessing, So it's from the Abraham, the Abraham story of Lech Lecha, of going out into the world, right, and creating a new one, and you shall be a blessing by that action. And then God blesses those who bless you, and curse that curses you. Pretty self-explanatory. And all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. That you're going to be so important and so great that just being connected to you, right, will be important, will be awesome for people that are just connected to you in some way. And we know with human history how Western religion sort of works out, that Abraham becomes the father of not one but three faith traditions, between and possibly more depending on how we're counting, right? But certainly in the grandest sense of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam will sort of trace back to Abraham in some way. And I think again, if one looks hard enough, one can find other faith traditions as well that are smaller that sort of have that connection with Abraham. So pretty cool for a guy in his 70s. Not bad. Sort of a midlife crisis at 75. And so he goes and he does, and he leaves Haran. As I spoke about on Friday a bit, this idea of Haran being this place of in between. It's not the worst place to be, but it's not the best place to be. It's somewhere sort of in the middle. It's sort of a land of just enough, or good enough, or okay. And so now he can't be who he's meant to be, stuck in Haran. He has to get up and go and create a new destiny in the land of Canaan, soon to be the land of Israel. Maybe not so soon. Takes a little while. Okay. Now we get back to the good stuff of Genesis. Family drama and family mishigas. So, Linda, you want to pick up here?
Sure. Abram took his wife Sarah and his brother's son Lot and all the wealth that they had amassed and the persons that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. When they arrived in the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem at the terebinth of Morah. The Canaanites were then in the land. The Eternal appeared to Abram and said, okay, I lost him. I will assign this land to your offspring. And he built an altar there to the Eternal who had appeared to him. From there, he moved on to the hill country east of Bethel and pitched his tent. And Bethel on the west and Ai on the east And he built there an altar to the Eternal and invoked the Eternal by name.
Okay, that's good right there. The family service is coming. Just got another minute or two, I guess. So Avram and Sarai and Lot, family goes together. The family that prays together stays together, so they also come out together out of Haran. It's an interesting idea here, talking about even the rabbis back then playing with the text a little bit. So they got some money apparently. This is a well-heeled family. I'm not sure what Abraham's doing for a living, but apparently they got some money. He's an idea man, but again, I'm not sure what he's doing day to day for cash. But they got wealth. Maybe Sarai's family has some cash, but they have wealth, and all of the people they had acquired. Nice way of saying slaves, right? So like Abraham has a household of slaves. The rabbis play with the people that they had acquired and saying, yeah, well, what that really means was, and so they say what that means is that he acquired them, that they acquired them, so to speak, and converted them to Judaism. And so that's really what it means, is that he has a household of Jewish people. Not exactly in terms of the original interpretation, but it's nice. It's nice. It's nice to have nice things. Okay, and so they all go together, one big happy family, and they're schlepping through the wilderness a little bit. You're looking at some cities, looking at some trees, looking at the Canaanites, and saying, "Yeah, you guys are going to be here long." So it's moving day, not just yet for the Canaanites, but looking at the Canaanites, and God saying, "Yeah, this is going to be it. This is going to be the land." It didn't take him very long to get there. Moses took 40 years. Abraham got there a little quicker, but I guess he had a shorter trip and less cargo. And then they're here, and they have a sacrifice, or built an altar. Doesn't say a sacrifice, I guess technically, but Abraham built an altar, calls out to God. We're on our way. We're on our way. We're off on the road to Canaan and having the time of our lives. Okay.
They don't know the name of God.
It's a great question, whether they know the name of God at this point, and the answer is maybe. I mean, it's in and out, because there's going to be a bigger reveal later on in Genesis, where God says, like, "I'm going to make my name known to you." But whatever Abraham has is what he used. He calls upon to God at that point, showing that connection. And now we get to a wonderful story about marital fidelity and husband love of a wife, and it gets a little ugly quickly here. So Leah, you want to unmute and give us a read?
Yeah, you're giving me the meaty stuff.
Oh, this is some good stuff here.
Then Abram journeyed by stages toward Negeb. There was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife, Sarai, "I know what a beautiful woman you are. If the Egyptians see you and think she is his wife, they will kill me and let you live. Please say that you are my sister. That will go well with me because of you, and that I may remain alive thanks to you."
Okay, a good moment here. There's, by the way, a that Abraham is schlepping his wife in a box, literally just like a wooden crate in a way, so no one would see her and how beautiful she was. That way they wouldn't be attacked on the road, right? So there's that midrash as well. So this famine, there's always a famine. You have to have a reason to go down to Egypt. You can't eat, you got to go to Egypt, whether it's a big country, they got a lot of food going on. And so they're about to get to the border. And, it's the border crossing between Canaan and Egypt. And he says to Sarah, got a problem here, because we're married, nice times, it's great. But the problem is, if the Egyptians see you and how beautiful you are, they're going to kill me to get me out of the way. And then they'll have you for themselves. So instead of saying that you're my wife, let's do sister instead. You can be my sister, Sarai. That way they won't be jealous of me and they won't kill me. So I have that scene from Chinatown in my head. That's okay. My sister, my daughter, my sister. She's my sister and my daughter. Yeah, so here's the wife and sister, moment. My wife, my sister, my wife. So he hatches this plan. Okay, what does this do for Abraham?
That he stays alive.
Stays alive. What does this do for Sarah?
Well, she now has some power over him.
Perhaps, but not so much in the next paragraph or two. So Sarah is still on the hook here because she's still beautiful. But now that they're not married, so to speak, it's a different scenario. So what do we have here? And Bob, you want to pick up here when Abram entered Egypt?
When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw how very beautiful the woman was. Pharaoh's courtiers saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's palace. And because of her, it went well with Abram. He required sheep, oxen, asses, male, female slaves, she-asses, and camels.
Okay, so we'll pause right there for a minute. So what's happening to Sarah here?
She's in the palace.
She's in the palace. She's an unmarried woman and gets to be taken to Pharaoh's palace. And what happened to Abraham?
He's given gifts.
He gets gifts. That's a nice way of putting it. He gets gifts. He gets presents. He gets sheep and cattle and slaves, camels.
She slaves.
A little bit of everything. Just gifts for being a nice guy.
To take his sister.
That's
They took his sister.
wife.
Literally, they took her.
To take his sister wife to the palace. Does this sound like she was just sold for chattel?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a rough day for poor Abram here and Sarah. This is not good for the maritals here. This is a little tough. One might even use the word. Perhaps Abraham sort of pimped her out a little bit at this moment in time, and sort of sent her to have a grand old time with Pharaoh in the palace. And that's not so great.
Does she become a concubine?
Yes, I think that is certainly the way we're looking at this. I think concubine is a good word.
Might be a nice change from 75 plus old man.
So I think concubine is certainly on the list here of words one can use here. And so that's not great for Sarah, but wait a minute, God's gonna save the day here. The eternal afflicts Pharaoh and all of his household with mighty plagues in the account of Sarai, the wife of Abram. Pharaoh sent for Abram and said, "What is this you have done to me? Why didn't you tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she was my sister so that I took her as my wife?" I think wife here could be quotes, but yes. "Here is your wife. Take her and be gone." And Pharaoh put men in charge of him and sent him off with his wife and all that he possessed. Works out in the end.
You get
Yeah.
all the goodies.
Yeah, he gets to keep them as parting gifts. It's sort of like on the game show. You bet your wife. So that's what we have here. There are a lot of midrashim that are used here to help exonerate Abraham because it ain't a good look. For our patriarch here, it's not the best story. And so the rabbis do a number here on trying to make this okay. Abraham knew that she would be fine, like there was a thing here and a thing there to make it okay. Every time Pharaoh, there's a little bit more of a vibrant midrash that sort of paints the scene in the bedroom. That every time like Pharaoh would sort of like go near her, like he'd get attacked by something, and so like they have to stay a certain amount of feet away from each other, or else the angel would come and smack Pharaoh or whatever it is, just to like make sure that Sarah's integrity and dignity is not impugned, and Abraham, is able to enter this agreement, and Abraham feels good about it, that nothing's going to actually happen. Like he knows ahead of time that it's going to be all right for Sarah in the palace. And there's a couple of commentators that say, maybe he shouldn't have done this. Maybe this wasn't the best idea that he ever had, was to go through this route. And maybe, God forbid, Abraham didn't act in the most righteous and just way.
This is kind of a foreshadow of when they were enslaved in Egypt and they wanted to leave with all the plagues. This is a forerunner of this.
Yeah, we have a little bit of that here. Some of the plagues being sent to rectify a difficult situation and free. It's a microcosm, right? You need to free Sarah, who is enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt. So you're right. There's a little bit of a foretaste for us here. But I'll tell you, this week's Bible study, we have a lot of lasciviousness going on in Genesis. First with Noah and some of that perhaps not so great moments, and here we have another one. And so, as I spoke about before, and on the high holidays, for those who remember, this idea of like the imperfect heroes, right? The Bible sort of like presents us these characters that are flawed and they make mistakes. And for me, like reading this story for Abraham, like the context keeps changing. Like as we all sort of view these stories through different eyes, depending on our age and our experiences. And certainly, like, this is not exactly a great Me Too story. I'll put it that way. This is a little bit rough, on that end. But I think that I think that attempts to exonerate Abraham and say, like he's fine, whatever it is, are perhaps not the best way of looking at them. I would propose, and just say more that like this wasn't his best moment in time, and he can own that. He'll be all right. He's been long dead. We can say that perhaps he didn't make the best move here, and we can be okay with that in terms of not feeling that we have to justify what he did. I have trouble sort of justifying this in any positive way, but I'm happy to hear some other thoughts.
Rabbi, can I just ask a question? By this time, what kind of, for lack of a better word, were laws or behaviors, etiquettes of the time? Because I read this now and I look through my eyes of being somebody who in this world now in 2021, where things certainly are different. What was their standard? What was the standard of life in those days? Or was that just something that happened? People did things like that. We certainly know that they had many wives and that type of thing. So where were their standards of living in those days? Where were those set from?
Well, I could certainly guess that it wasn't like we were living in a time of high, standards when it came to how women were treated. I think that could certainly be fair to say.
Right.
Well, it's easy to look at this anachronistically, and sort of say, and condemn Abraham, but also I think engaging in a game of wife swap might not have been necessarily common in that time period. And certainly we can sort of feel a little bit of sympathy and empathy for Sarah at being through this ridiculous exercise, no matter what sort of the laws and standards were. And again, this is mostly Abraham, right? Abraham orchestrates this entire thing. They're not even in Egypt yet, and he's putting this plan together and say, hey, I'm worried that because of your beauty, I might die. So we have to sort of fix that, in a different way. And so it does come from him, it's not their plan, it's his plan. That's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say.
Saying,
It's unreasonable for him to conclude that?
I don't
Well,
know.
I
That's
have a
a good question.
question.
The question was it unreasonable for him to conclude that because of her beauty that he might be massacred in some way? And it's a good question. I don't know how reasonable it was for him to sort of think that that would be the case. I mean, he might.
Rabbi, I have a
There are a
question.
lot of ways he can get killed. Probably, right?
Take the old Jewish guy's wife.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, go ahead, Bob.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It says here that he got a lot of more cattle.
Yeah.
Didn't he bring a lot of it already into Egypt?
You can always use more cattle. I mean, where's the beef, right? I mean, you have to make a living. So yeah, he had stuff already, but now it gets even more, and his household gets bigger. And we know as we continue through the story that like wherever he started from, right? Like it's clear that he had started with some wealth, right? Like he had some assets to him because he's leaving Haran with money, with wealth and with slaves and with he has like a caravan behind him, right? And in Egypt, he's getting even more, and so he is a person of some wealth and some prominence. We don't yet have a sense of where his original money came from, that maybe like, his father's idol shop did really well, and he's getting a little stipend, a little, funded by Papa a little bit, we don't know where he's getting this money from, but he's a man of substance, which by the way, I think makes it even trickier. Going back to your comment, the question about like the desperate times or like what to be expected. Like if he was Joe Schmo Jew walking down the street, that could be a bigger problem. But if he is someone of some wealth and some power, then maybe he didn't have to worry as much as he did. The reality is, I'm pretty sure the Pharaoh, had the policy of what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine too. So I don't really think that much would have stopped him. And Pharaoh is obviously mightier than anyone in the region, and so whatever he wanted, he could take for himself. And whether Abraham was in any danger, we don't know. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. I just imagine Sarah not having a great time with this endeavor. And again, we don't know what their marital life was like. I just can't imagine this helping it in terms of their relationship. Hey, honey, you didn't wash the dishes today. Remember when you tried to sell me into slavery? Like that's sort of an out for a lot of things. I feel like it's not great.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Like remember that moment? Like it really puts you, I think, on the bad end for a while. I feel like the guilt trip is coming.
But don't you think that Pharaoh, that was Pharaoh's reputation, which is why Abram, did that? I mean, you don't just out of the blue, but Pharaoh took beautiful women. It was should have been a known fact.
Yeah, and it's also a big country. I'm not really sure, why he's necessarily going to be in Pharaoh's purview either. But you're right. Like there's, he might have been very worried, rightfully so. Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like there might have been a concern that he's bringing in the beautiful wife into Egypt, and there's going to be some shenanigans and some funny business, going on. And maybe, I think what some of the other rabbis might suggest is maybe there was maybe a different plan A. He went pretty quick to the plan of selling his wife for cattle, and maybe there were some other steps in between we could have gotten there from. I think he pushed the red button pretty hard. I feel like, and made himself quite a deal, and so he comes out of this smelling like a rose, or at least in terms of getting all of his stuff. And Sarah, at least physically, was not harmed according to this story, but it could have gone the other way as well. So if he goes back to, maybe Abraham felt he needed to do this to save his own skin. One would wonder how concerned he would be about his wife's skin, as well. And so again, good for Abraham to help himself out. I would not say that, even though we're not in medieval Europe at this point, I think his chivalry might be questioned, on that. Yeah, honey, I'll be fine. Don't worry about me. Go off with this nice man. I'll
got
be.
air conditioning at the palace.
Yeah, air conditioning. Don't worry, I'll be fine.
He'll buy you a dress or two.
Yeah, I can always remarry.
Candy.
Yeah, I can always find someone else, kind of, So
Just sit here in the dark.
yeah, just we'll see. And so it is a tough story, is what I was just saying. Yeah, we can find ways of trying to make it work, but I don't think it really changes the fact that it's a little rough. It's a little rough story for Sarah. The conversation later might not be the most pleasant. Okay, like 5 minutes left. We can play with chapter 13 a little bit. Rick, you want to pick up there?
From Egypt, Abram went up into the Negev with his wife and all that he possessed, together with Lot. Now, Abram was very rich in cattle, silver, and gold, and he proceeded by stages from the Negev as far as Bethel to the place where his house was formerly, between Bethel and Ai, the site of the altar that he had built there at first. And there, Abram invoked the Lord by name.
Yeah, so we've heard this story before. It's a little repetitious, but he's back. Does a little blessing, and let's keep going.
Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks, so that the land could not support them staying together, for their possessions were so great that they could not remain together. And there was quarreling between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and those of Lot's cattle. The Canaanites and the Perizzites were then dwelling in the land. Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, between my herdsmen and yours, for we are kinsmen."
Okay. Hey, give me a little more.
Is not the whole land before you? Let us separate. If you go north, I will go south.
Okay, so going back to it, right? So now we're back to our regularly scheduled programming. Abraham and his cousin, I believe, biologically speaking, I think he's a cousin at this point. Nephew. I think that these words get changed a little bit, because I think Lot is the son of his brother, of Terach's brother. Going back to the drawing board with it. I think he's often referred to as nephew, to be sure. Like, that's how I think we hear it. But I believe at the end of chapter 9,
Because it describes him as the grandson.
11. Yeah, he's yes.
His son Abram and his grandson Lot.
Yeah, so his grandson would be that. Wouldn't that make him cousins at that point, right?
No, not if Abram's his son. It would make Abram and Lot uncle nephew. Terah's son is Abram. His grandson is Lot, the son of Haran.
Yeah, but isn't Haran Terach's brother?
That's what Haran was in.
Oh, somebody, yeah. Yes. We're working on the family tree.
That's the line of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. So Haran is the son of Terah.
Okay, yeah, so yes.
Haran begot Lot.
Yes, there we go. We got the nephew. Okay. So nephew Lot, they're hanging around the wilderness. They're doing some fun stuff. But all their people, because they got so much cattle, they're all fighting with each other. They're all killing each other here over the land. And so, hey, maybe we don't hang out so much because let's separate. Let's, conquer the land a little bit, or at least stretch out. We don't have to be in each other's space all the time. And so you pick. You want to go north, you can go north, I'll go south. You go south, I'll go north. It's amicable. Abraham, the deal maker. Up here, a lot looked about him.
I looked about him and saw how well watered was the whole plain of the Jordan, all of it. This was before the Lord had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah.
Foreshadowing. Go ahead. It's foreshadowing.
All the way to the door, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward.
He's very accommodating. I mean, Lot's like, I see the good land. And we take that.
Thus they parted from each other. Abram remained in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the plain, pitching his tents near Sodom. Now the inhabitants of Sodom were very wicked sinners against the Lord.
More foreshadowing. Right, we're going to get to them later.
When they talk about the plains of Jordan, are they talking about the banks of each side of the river? Or are they talking about the country of Jordan?
The former, the first one.
Banks.
Yeah. And so looking over just the beautiful river country, good to be by the river, right? That's where all the fertile land is. And so Lot is, of course, taking that fertile land for himself, and Abraham's hoofing it a little bit more to the center. And of course, we're going to find out about Sodom probably next week, because we have a little bit more to go. What verse are we up to in the big old book? 14, chapter 13. Are we up to 13, 14 is where we're going to pick up next week. A little more covenanting, so to speak. We're going to get a little bit more about God's promise to Abram, and we are going to get into a couple juicy stories as well. I love a little Genesis. Excellent. It's a fun book. Okay, my friends, we're going to start with Adult B'nai Mitzvah in a few moments. For everyone else, great to see you, great studying with you, and we'll catch you on the flip next week
Okay.
for more Genesis fun.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night. Good night.
Right.